Today we're going to be talking about the excretory system and regulating the internal environment, which is closely related to the excretory system. So first off, we have conformers versus regulators. There are two paths for organisms. One is they can regulate their internal environment, so they have pretty constant internal conditions, or they can conform to their external environment, allow their internal conditions to fluctuate along with external changes. So we would call those endotherms and ectotherms. So endo is internal, ecto is outside. Humans are endotherms. We regulate our internal environment. So here are some examples. In thermoregulation, so they regulate their own temperature, or they let the environment regulate their temperature. This snake is a conformer. He lets the environment regulate his temperature, which is why you see snakes basking in the sun or not moving when it's cold out. Whereas a polar bear is a regulator. He keeps himself warm even when it's cold outside. And osmoregulation is the regulation of oxygen in a system. And fish is a regulator, so it works to maintain its internal environment. And this weird jellyfish-looking thing is a conformer. It just goes with the flow. Whatever the environment is what it does. All right, homeostasis. We're going to talk a little more later about exactly what it looks like. But first off, what it is keeping the balance. So think of it this way, homeostasis. You want to stay where you're at. So we're going to keep in balance. So for animals, their body has to coordinate a lot of different systems all at once in order to maintain steady state, such as our temperature, thermoregulation, our blood sugar levels, our energy production, our water balance, and our intracellular waste disposal, the nutrients we have in our system, the balance of ions in our system, and cell growth. So we're not going to talk about all of these, we'll talk about a lot of them. But we have to maintain this steady state condition. If we don't, something goes out of whack in our system. Alright, so animal systems have, obviously, they now support multicellular life. So you had unicellular life with diffusion, just pure diffusion, worked great because we've got one whole cell in its own environment. Whereas here, when you get all these cells stuck together, diffusion can only get in this one, or this one, or this one. Doesn't work quite as well coming through. So, to solve that exchange problem, we've got our circulatory system for distributing nutrients. So we're distributing nutrients. And our excretory system, which will help remove wastes, get rid of what we don't want out of our system, like carbon dioxide or nitrogen wastes. So we want to get rid of our nitrogen waste and regulate our water. So that's overcoming the limitations of diffusion by those systems. All right, osmoregulation. Sorry, it's not oxygen regulation, it is water balance. Right, we talked about how fish they regulate how much water they have in them in order to make them either float or sink. Oh, sorry, that's my physics class. Anyway, so that's what they do. All right, so fish in fresh water, for water balance, it's hypotonic, where the water will flow into the cells because it's a lower pressure in the cells, so it goes into the lower pressure region, the path of least resistance, if you will. So water flows into the cells and it loses salts. Whereas in salt water, they'd be hypertonic. So there's a higher pressure in the cells than outside the cells. So it loses water from the cells, does not lose salts. And on land, it's a very dry environment, so those animals have to conserve water and will likely need to conserve salt. So here you can see our fish takes in water through its gills and other parts of its surface, and then it takes in water and some ions in their food through its mouth, takes some salt ions in through its gills in fresh water, takes in salt ions, and then excretion of large amounts of water and dilute urine from its kidneys. Okay, and then this fish in salt water gets water and salt ions from drinking salt water loses water through the gills. So this one guy's gaining water through the gills. This guy's losing it through the gills. And excretion of salt ions from the gills. It gets rid of some salt ions and some more salt ions and water from the kidneys. All right, so why do all land animals have to conserve water? Well, we're constantly losing water. As you breathe, water's evaporating, and our waste products give off a lot of water. And if we aren't conserving water, you may lose life while searching for water to replace the water you've lost. All right, so specifically, let's talk about waste products. So what are waste products? What do we have? Well, we digest our food into, we've got carbohydrates break down into carbon dioxide and water. Lipids, roughly, break down into carbon dioxide and water. So those fats break down into carbon dioxide and water. Proteins break down into carbon dioxide, water, and nitrogen. And nucleic acids break down into carbon dioxide, water, phosphorus, and nitrogen. So there aren't that many nucleic acids in cells, but they do break down. So cellular digestion leads to cellular waste. Animals poison themselves from the inside by digesting proteins because proteins break down to nitrogen, and nitrogen is highly toxic to our systems. All right, so nitrogenous waste disposal. Proteins, like we just said, break down into ammonia, NH3, that's nitrogen waste, which is very toxic. It is carcinogenic. It's very soluble. It easily crosses membranes, so we need to dilute it and get rid of it fast, so we don't end up with toxins in our system. So how do you get rid of nitrogenous wastes depends on who you are and where you live. A couple different ways. For example, aquatic organisms are totally fine with losing water, so they just straight up use the water to flush out the ammonia in their system. It's soluble in the water, and then they just flush out the water. And so they flush it out as ammonia. They don't even change it, but it's very toxic. So if they had some issue with that, it would be toxic to their system. Now, terrestrial animals have to conserve water. So, like here you can see mammals, amphibians, sharks, some fishes. So we need to conserve water. So we turn that nitrogen waste into urea, which is less toxic. And so then we're able to flush it out with a smaller amount of water. And then terrestrial egg layers like birds, insects, reptiles, snails, they turn it into uric acid because they need to conserve the most water. So uric acid is the least toxic, so it can just sit there until it's eventually disposed of. So here you go, freshwater animals. Water removal and nitrogen waste disposal. They've got this surplus of water, so they just dilute it and excrete it. Dilute the ammonia and excrete it. Like you've got those really strong household cleaning chemicals, you can dilute them and then they're not as harmful to you. They have to excrete a lot of water anyway, so they just excrete dilute urine. So they pass that ammonia continuously through their gills or any moist membrane they have. They have a loss of salts, though, which they reabsorb in the kidneys or through active transport across the gills. Land animals, their nitrogen waste disposal is on land. So they've turned it into a less toxic waste product because they've got to conserve water. So urea is less soluble, so it won't take as much water with it, and it's also less toxic. So the kidney filters those wastes out of the blood, reabsorbs the water, and gets rid of the waste. So urine is urea, salts, excess sugar, and water. And we'll talk about how that's made momentarily. Urine is very concentrated, but concentrated ammonia would be significantly too toxic for our system. All right, and those egg-laying land animals, their nitrogen waste disposal is in the egg, so they don't have a place to get rid of waste in an egg. They need even less soluble molecule, so a molecule that doesn't take up any water. They make uric acid, which is bigger. It's a big old molecule, it's less soluble, and it's less toxic. So it just precipitates out as a white paste. So this itty-bitty living space, they've got to have it so it just stays out of the way. So that's what they do, turn it into uric acid. All right, so now we're talking specifically about the mammalian system of the excretory system. So the key functions are one, filtration. We filter fluids from the blood, they're collected, and that includes water and solutes. Then we reabsorb, we selectively reabsorb the needed substances back into the blood, so just what we need. Then we secrete, we pump out unwanted substances to the urine, so anything from the blood gets secreted into this system. You're going to find out what's in there. And then excretion is where we remove excess substances and toxins from the body. So we get it out of there. All right, so here's the kidney. If you take two fists and you put them right underneath your ribs on either side, that's where your kidneys are. So here, there you go, there's your kidneys. Here's the body shape right there. So there are the kidneys. Got the aorta, the adrenal gland, inferior vena cava. Here's the kidney, the renal vein and artery. Remember, arteries take blood away from the heart, so it's bringing blood to the kidneys. And the vein takes blood to the heart, so it takes blood from the kidney to the heart. Then here's the ureter. We're going to talk about that. So we've got making the urine in the kidneys, then it goes through the ureter, into the bladder, and then muscles contract and force it out through the urethra. Okay, so closer look at the kidney. So here's a cross-section of a kidney. We've got what these are called renal pyramids, and we have two layers in kind of this section of the renal pyramid. We've got the medulla, which is up through here, and then the cortex is the outer layer. These pyramids are full of nephrons, which are the little veiny looking things here. This is the collecting duct. So the nephrons do all sorts of things we'll talk about, and then it goes into this collecting duct, and then gets put out in the kidneys. All right, so a nephron is the functional unit in a kidney. So the nephrons do all the work. And there are 1 million nephrons per kidney. It's a lot of nephrons. So what they do is they filter out urea and other solutes like salt or sugar. And the process is this blood plasma is filtered into the nephron, and then we have this selective reabsorption of valuable solutes and water. So we get flexibility and control. Right, the question is, why is it selective reabsorption and not selective filtration? Well, we've got this countercurrent exchange system. So the blood flows one way, and then this filtrate flows the opposite way, and then we've got our reabsorption across gradients of a lower concentration of one thing here and a higher concentration of the other here. So in a nephron, we've got the interaction of the circulatory and excretory systems. So the circulatory system, the big part it plays is in the glomerulus, which is a ball of capillaries. So capillaries, remember, we've got your arteries, which break down into arterioles, which break down into capillaries. So we've got this ball of capillaries called the glomerulus, which sits inside this space called Bowman's capsule. And this is all making up a nephron. So then Bowman's capsule, we're going to go through the proximal tubule. Then this is this selective reabsorption. Then there's the loop of Henle, and there's secretion of things we don't want. Then the distal tubule, and then into the collecting duct where water is reabsorbed more. All right, so the nephron, there's filtration is our first step. In the glomerulus, small particles are filtered out of the blood. So the capillaries have the epithelial tissue, this, which is fairly small. So small things can get out, but large things stay in. So small things like water, glucose, salts or ions, and urea come out, but cells and proteins are not filtered out because they're too big to get through. So since the way it works is there's high blood pressure in the kidneys, which forces those small particles out of the blood vessel, which leads to, you'd have a problem if you have already high blood pressure and then higher blood pressure in the kidneys, you can get kidney damage.